Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are continuing in The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. We are up to chapter 12, and this is entitled Ralph Entereth into the Burg of the Four Friths. And with that said, I will get started. When they came up to the wall, they saw that it was well builded of good ashlar, and so high that they might not see the roofs of the town because of it. But there were tall towers on it, many of them, strong and white. The road led up straight to the master gate of the burg, and there was a bailey before it strongly walled, and manned with weaponed men and a captain going out amongst them. But they entered it along with men bringing wares into the town, and none heeded them much, till they came to the very gate on the further side of a moat that was both deep and clean. But as now the bridge was down and the portcullis up, so that the market people might pass in easily, for it was yet early in the day. But before the door on either side stood men at arms well weaponed, and on the right side was their captain, a tall man with a bare grizzled head, but otherwise all armed, who stopped everyone whom he knew not, and asked their business. As Ralph came riding up with Roger beside him, one of the guards laid his spear across, and bade them stand, and the captain spake in a dry cold voice. "Whence comest thou, man-at-arms?" "From the abbey at St. Mary at Higham," said Ralph. "Yea," said the captain, smiling grimly, "even so I might have deemed. Thou wilt be one of the Lord Abbot's lily lads." "No, I am not," quoth Ralph angrily. "Well, well," said the captain, "what is thy name?" "Ralph Motherson," quoth Ralph, knitting his brow. Said the captain, "And whither wilt thou?" Said Ralph, "On mine own errands." "Thou answerest not over freely," quoth the captain. Said Ralph, "Then it is even, for thou askest freely enough." "Well, well," said the captain, grinning in no unfriendly wise, "thou seemest a stout lad enough. And as to my asking, it is my craft as captain of the North Gate. But now tell me, friendly, goest thou to any kinsman or friend in the burg?" Then Ralph's brow cleared, and he said, "Nay, fair sir." "Well then," said the captain, "art thou but riding straight through to another gate, and so away again?" "Nay," said Ralph, "if I may, I would abide here the night over, or mayhappen longer." "Therein thou shalt do well, young man," said the captain. "Then I suppose thou wilt to some hostelry? Tell me which one." Said Ralph, "Nay, I wot not to which one, knowing not the town." But Roger close by him spake and said, "My lord shall go to the Flower de Luce, which is in the big square." "Truly," said the captain, "he goes to a good harbour. And moreover, fair sir, tomorrow thou shalt see a goodly sight from thine inn. Thou mayest do no better, lord. But thou, Carl, who art thou, who knowest the inside of our burg so well, though I know thee not, for as well as I know our craftsmen and vavasors?" Then Roger's words hung on his lips a while, and the knight bent his brow on him, till at last he said, "Sir Captain, I was minded to lie, and say that I am his young knight's serving man." The captain broke in on him grimly, "Thou wert best not lie." "Yea, sir," quoth Roger, "I deemed as if it was in my tongue's end, and thou wouldest find me out, so I have naught to do but tell thee the very sooth. This it is, I am a man made masterless by the thieves of the Dry Tree. From my land at Hampton under Scar have I been driven, my chattels have been lifted, and my friends slain. And therefore, by your leave would I ride in the host of the burg, that I may pay back the harm which I had, according to the saw, better bale by breeding bale. So, Lord, I ask thee, wilt thou lend me the sword, and give me the loaf, that I may help both thee and the burg, and me?" The captain looked at him closely and sharply, while the carle faced him with open, simple eyes. And at last he said, "Well, Carl, thou wert about to name thyself this young knight's serving man. Be thou even so whiles he abideth in the burg, and when he leaveth the burg, then come back to me here any day before noon, and may I be, I shall put a sword in thy fist, and a horse between thy thighs. But," and he wagged his head threateningly at Roger, "see that thou art at the Flower de Luce when thou art called for." Roger held his peace and seemed abashed at this word, and the captain turned to Ralph and said courteously, "Young knight, if thou art seeking adventures, thou shalt find them in our host. And if thou be but half wise, as thou seemest bold, thou wilt not fail to gain honour and wealth, both in the service of the Burg, for we be overmuch beset with foemen that we should not welcome any white and wary warrior, though he be an alien of blood and land. If thou thinkest well of this, then send me thy man here, and give me word of thy mind, and I shall lead thee to the chiefs of the port, and make the way easy for thee." Ralph thanked him, and rode through the gate into the street, and Roger still went beside his stirrup. Presently Ralph turned to Roger, and spake to him somewhat sourly, and said, "Thou hadst one lie in thy mouth, and didst swallow it, but how shall I know that another did not come out thence? Withal thou must needs be my fellow here, will I, nill I, for thou it was that didst put that word into the captain's mouth, that thou shouldest serve me while I abide in the Burg. So I will say here and now that my mind misgives me concerning thee, whether thou be not of those very thieves and tyrants whom thou didst missay but a little while ago." "Yea," said Roger, "thou art wise indeed to set me down as one of the Dry Tree. Doubtless that is why I delivered thee from their ambush even now. And as for my service, thou mayest need it, for indeed I deem thee not so safe as thou deemest thyself in this Burg." "What?" said Ralph. "Dost thou blow hot and cold? Why, even now, when we were in the wood, thou wert telling me that I had not at all to fear in the Burg of the Four Friths, and that all was done there by reason and with justice. What is this new thing, then, which thou hast found out, or what is it that I have to fear?" Roger changed countenance thereat, and seemed somewhat confused, as one who had been caught unawares. But he gat his own face presently, and said, "Nay, Sir Knight, I will tell thee the truth right out. In the wood yonder thy danger was great, that thou mightest run into the hands of them of the Dry Tree. Therefore true it is that I spake somewhat beyond my warrant concerning the life of the folk of the Burg, as how could I help it? But surely whatever thy peril may be here, it is naught to that which awaited thee at Hampton." "Nay, but what is the peril?" said Ralph. Quoth Roger, "If thou wilt become their man and enter into their host, there is none. For they will ask few questions of so good a man-at-arms, when they know that thou art theirs. But if thou naysay that, it may well be that they will be for turning the key on thee till thou tellest them what and whence thou art." Ralph answered not, thinking in his mind that this was like enough, so he rode on soberly till Roger said, "Anyhow, thou mayest turn the cold shoulder on me if thou wilt. Yet were I thee, I would not. For so it is both that I can help thee, as I deem in time to come, and that I have helped thee somewhat in time past." Now Ralph was young, and could not abide the blame of thanklessness, so he said, "Nay, nay, fellow, go on we together to the Flower de Luce." Roger nodded his head and grumbled somewhat, and they made no stay except that now and then Ralph drew rein to look at goodly things in the street, for there were many open booths therein, so that the whole street looked like a market. The houses were goodly of building, but not very tall, the ways wide and well paved. Many folk were in the street, going up and down on their errands, and both men and women of them seemed to Ralph stout and strong, but not very fair of favour. Withal they seemed intent on their business, and paid little heed to Ralph and his fellow, though he was by his attire plainly a stranger. Then Ralph saw a house more gaily adorned than most, and a sign hung out from it whereon was done an image of St. Loy, and underneath the same a booth on which was set out weapons and war gear exceedingly goodly. And two knaves of the armourer were standing by to serve folk, and crying their wares with, "What do ye lack?" from time to time. So he stayed and fell to looking wistfully at the gleam and glitter of those fair things, till one of the aforesaid knaves came to his side and said, "Fair sir, surely thou lackest somewhat. What have we here for thy needs?" So Ralph thought, and called to mind the strong little steel axe of the man whom he had slain yesterday, and asked for the sight of such a weapon, if he might perchance cheapen it. And the lad brought a very goodly steel axe, gold inlaid about the shaft, and gave him the price thereof, which Ralph deemed he might compass. So he brought round his scrip to his hand, that he might take out his money. But while his hand was yet in the bag, out came the master armourer, a tall and very stark carle, and said in a courteous wise, Sir knight, thou art a stranger to me, and I know thee not, so I must needs ask for a sight of thy license to buy weapons, under the seal of the Burg. Hear a wonder, said Ralph, that a free man for his money shall not buy wares set out to be bought, unless he have the Burgreave's hand and seal for it? Nay, take thy florins, master, and give me the axe, and let the jest end there. I jest not, young rider, quoth the armourer. When we know thee for a liegeman of the Burg, thou shalt buy what thou wilt without question. But otherwise I have told thee the law, and how may I, the master of the craft, break the law? Be not wrath, fair sir, I will set aside thine axe for thee, till thou bring me the license, or bid me come see it, and thou shalt get the said license at the town hall straightway, when they may certify thee no foeman of the Burg. Ralph saw that it availed nothing to bicker with the smith, and so went his way somewhat crestfallen, and that the more as he saw Roger grinning a little. Now they came into the market-place, on one side whereof was the master church of the town, which was strongly built, and with a tall tower to it, but was not very big, but a little adorned. Over against it they saw the sign of the Flower de Luce, a goodly house and great. Thitherward they turned, but in the face of the hostelry, amidmost the place, was a thing which Roger pointed at with a grin that spoke as well as words. And this was a high gallows tree, furnished with 4 forks or arms, each carved and wrought in the fashion of the very bough of a tree, from which dangled 4 nooses. And above them all was a board whereon was written in big letters, The Dry Tree. And at the foot of this gallows were divers folks laughing and talking. So Ralph understood at once that those 4 men, whom he had seen led away bound yesterday, should be hanged thereon. So he stayed a franklin who was passing by, and said to him, Sir, I am stranger in this town, and I would know if justice shall be done on the 4 woodmen today. Nay, said the man, but tomorrow. They are even now before the judges. Then said Roger in a surly voice, Why art thou not there to look on? Because, quoth the man, there is little to see there, and not much more to hearken. The thieves shall be speedily judged, and not questioned with torments, so that they may be the lustier to feel what the hangman shall work on them tomorrow. Then forsooth the show shall be goodly. But far better it had been that we had had our hands on the great witch of these dastards, as we looked on to have her. But now folks say that she has not been brought within the gates, and it is to be feared that she slipped through our fingers once more. Roger laughed and said, Simple are ye folk of the Burg, and know not of her shifts. I tell thee, it is not unlike that she is in the Burg even now, and hath in hand to take out your poison the 4 whom ye have caught. The franklin laughed scornfully in his turn, and said, If we be simple, thou art a fool merely. Are we not stronger and more than the Dry Tree? How should she not be taken? How should she not be known if she were walking about these streets? Have we no eyes, fool carle? And he laughed again, for he was wroth. Ralph hearkened, and a kind of fear seemed gripping his heart. So he asked the franklin, Tell me, sir, are we too speaking of a woman who is queen of these strong thieves? Yea, said he, or it might be better be said that she is their goddess, their Malmet, their devil, the very heart and soul of their wickedness. But one day shall we have her body and soul, and then shall her body have but an evil day of it till she dieth in this world. Yea, forsooth, if she can die at all, quoth Roger. The franklin looked sourly on him and said, Good man, thou knowest much of her, meseemeth. Whence art thou? Said Roger speedily, From Hampton under Scar, and her rebel I am, and her dastard, and her runaway. Therefore I know her forsooth. Well, the franklin said, Thou seemest a true man, and yet I would counsel thee to put a rein on thy tongue when thou art minded to talk of the devil of the Dry Tree, or thou mayest come to harm in the Burg. He walked away towards the gallows therewith, and Roger said almost as if he were talking to himself, A heavy-footed fool goeth yonder. But after this talk we were better hidden by the walls of the Flower de Luce. So therewith they went on towards the hostel. But the market-place was wide, and they were yet some minutes getting to the door. And ere they came there, Ralph said, knitting his brows anxiously, "Is this woman fair or foul to look on?" "That is not so easy to tell of," said Roger. "While she is foul, whiles very fair. Whiles young and whiles old, whiles cruel and whiles kind. But note this, when she is the kindest, then are her carles the cruelest, and she is the kinder to them because they are cruel." Ralph pondered what he said, and wondered if this were verily the woman whom he had delivered, or some other. As if answering to his unspoken thought, Roger went on, "They speak but of one woman amongst them of the Dry Tree, but in sooth they have many others who are like unto her in one way or other. And this again is a reason why they may not lay hands on the very queen of them all." Therewith they came into the hostel, and found it fair enough within, the hall great and goodly for such a house, and with but 3 chapmen carles therein. Straightway they called for meat, for it was now past noon, and the folk of the house served them when the grooms had taken charge of Falcon. And Roger served Ralph as if he were verily his man. Then Ralph went to his chamber aloft and rested a while, but came down into the hall a little before nuns, and found Roger there walking up and down the hall floor, and no man else. So he said to him, "Though thou art not of the Burg, thou knowest it. Wilt thou not come abroad then and show it me? For I have a mind to learn the ways of the folk here." Said Roger, and smiled a little, "If thou commandest me as my lord, I will come. Yet I were better pleased to abide behind, for I am weary with night waking and sorrow, and have I a burden of thought, one which I must bear to the end of the road, and if I put it down I shall have to go back and take it up again." Ralph thought that he excused himself with more words than were needed, but he took little heed of it. Then did Ralph nod to him friendly, and went out of the house afoot, but left his weapons and armor behind him by the rede of Roger. Chapter 13. The Streets of the Burg of the Four Friths. He went about the streets, and found them all much like to the one which he had entered by the north gate. He saw no poor or wretched houses, and none very big as of great lords. They were well and stoutly builded, but as aforesaid, not much adorned either, with carven work or painting. There were folk enough in the streets, and now Ralph, as was like to be, looked specially at the women, and though many of them little better favoured than the men, being both dark and low. Neither were they gaily clad, though their raiment, like the houses, was stout and well wrought. But here and there he came on a woman taller and whiter than the others, as though she were of another blood. All such of these as he saw were clad otherwise than the darker women, their heads uncoiffed, uncovered save for some garland or silken band, their gowns yellow like wheat straw, but gaily embroidered, sleeveless withal and short, scarce reaching to the ankles, and while so thin that they were rather clad with the embroidery than the cloth. Shoes they had not, but sandals bound on their naked feet with white thongs, and each bore an iron ring about her right arm. The more part of the men wore weapons at their sides, and had staves in hand. They were clad in short jerkins, brown or blue of colour, and looked ready for battle, if any moment should call them thereto. But among them were men of different favour and stature from these. Taller for the most part, unarmed and clad in long gowns of fair colours, with cloths of thin and gay-coloured web twisted about their heads. These he took for merchants, as they were oftenest standing in about the booths and shops, whereof there were some in all the streets, though the market for victuals and such like he found for that day and but scantily peopled. Out of one of these markets, which was the fish and fowl market, he came into a long street that led him down to a gate right over against that whereby he had entered the burg. And as he came thereto, he saw that there was a wide way clear of all the houses inside of the wall, so that men-at-arms might go freely from one part to the other. And as he had noted that a wide way led from each port out of the great place, and each ended not but in a gate. But as to any castle in the town he saw none. And when he asked a burgher thereof, the carle laughed in his face, and said to him that the whole burg, houses and all, was a castle, and that it would turn out to be none of the easiest to win. And forsooth Ralph himself was much of that mind. Now he was just within the south gate when he held this talk, and there were many folk thereby already, and more flocking thereto. So he stood there to see what should betide. And anon he heard great blowing of horns and trumpets all along the wall, as he deemed other horns answered from without. And so it was. For soon the withoutward horns grew louder, and the folk fell back on either side of the way. And next the gates were thrown wide open, which before had been shut save for a wicket. Thereafter came the first of a company of men-at-arms, footmen with bills some, and some with bows, and all armed knights and sergeants a horseback. So streamed in these weaponed men till Ralph saw that it was a great host that was entering the burg. And his heart rose within him, so warrior-like were they of men in array, though no big men of their bodies. And many of them bore signs of battle about them, both in the battering of their armor and the rending of their raiment, and the clouts tied about the wounds of their bodies. After a while among the warriors came herds of neat and flocks of sheep and strings of horses, of the spoil which the host had lifted. And then wains filled, some with weapons and war gear, and some with bales of goods and household stuff. Last came captives, some going afoot, and some for weariness borne in wains. For all these war-taken thralls were women and women children. Of males there was not so much as a little lad. Of the women, many seemed fair to Ralph, despite their grief and travail. And as he looked on them, he deemed that they must be of the kindred and nation of the fair white women he had seen in the streets, though they were not clad like those, but diversely. So Ralph gazed on this pageant till all had passed, and he was weary with the heat and the dust and the confused clamor of shouting and laughter and talking. And whereas most of the folk followed after the host and their spoil, the streets of the town there were about soon left empty and peaceful. So he turned into a street narrower than most, that went east from the south gate, and was much shaded from the afternoon sun, and went slowly down it, meaning to come about the inside of the wall till he should hit the east gate, and so into the great place when the folk should have gone their ways home. He saw no folk in the street, save here and there an old woman sitting at the door of her house, and maybe a young child with her. As he came to where the street turned somewhat, even such a carline was sitting on a clean white doorstep on the sunny side, somewhat shaded by a tall rose laurel tree in a great tub. And she sang as she sat spinning, and Ralph stayed to listen in his idle mood, and he heard how she sang in a dry, harsh voice, "Clashed sword on shield in the harvest field, and no man blames the red flames, war's candlewick on roof and rick. Now dead lies the yeoman unwept and unknown, on the field he hath furrowed, the ridge he hath sown. And all in the middle of weathers and neat, the maidens are driven with blood on their feet. For yet twixt the burg gate and battle half won, the dust-driven highway creeps up hill and on, and the smoke of the beacons goes coiling aloft, while the gathering horn bloweth loud, louder and oft. Throw wide the gates, for not night waits. Though the chase is dead, the moon's o'erhead, and we need the clear, our spoil to share. Shake the lots in the helm, then for brethren are we, and the goods of my missing are gainful to thee. Lo, thine are the wethers, and his are the kine, and the colts of the marshland unbroken are thine, with the dapple-grey stallion that trampled his groom, and Giles hath the gold-blossomed rose of the loom. Lo, leaps out the last lot, and naught have I won, but the maiden unmerry, by battle undone." Even as her song ended, came one of those fair yellow-gowned damsels round the corner of the street, bearing in her hand a light basket full of flowers. And she lifted up her head and beheld Ralph there. Then she went slowly and dropped her eyelids, and it was pleasant to Ralph to behold her, for she was as fair as need be. Her corn-colored gown was dainty and thin, and but for its silver embroidery had hidden her limbs but little. The rosiness of her ankles showed amidst her white sandal thongs, and there were silver rings and gold on her arms along with the iron ring. Now she lifted up her eyes and looked shyly at Ralph, and he smiled at her well pleased, and deemed it would be good to hear her voice. So he went up to her and greeted her, and she seemed to take his greeting well, though she glanced swiftly at the carline in the doorway. Said Ralph, "Fair maiden, I am a stranger in this town, and have seen things I do not wholly understand. Now wilt thou tell me before I ask the next question, who will be those war-taken thralls, whom even now I saw brought into the burg by the host? Of what nation be they, and what kindred?" Straightway was the damsel all changed. She left her dainty tricks, and drew herself up straight and stiff. She looked at him in the eyes, flushing red, and with knit brows a moment, and then passed by him with swift and firm feet, as one both angry and ashamed. But the carline, who had beheld the two with a grin on her wrinkled face, changed aspect also, and cried out fiercely after the damsel, and said, "What? Dost thou flee from the fair young man, and he so kind and with soft with thee, thou jade? Yea, I suppose thou dost fetch and carry for some mistress who is young and a fool, and who has not yet learned how to deal with the daughters of thine accursed folk. Ah, if I had but money to buy some one of you, and a good one, she should do something else for me than showing her fairness to young men. And I would pay her for her long legs and her white skin, till she should curse her fate that she had not been born little and dark-skinned and free, and with the heels unbloodied with the blood of her back." Thus she went on, though the damsel was long out of earshot of her curses. And Ralph tarried not to get away from her spiteful babble, which he now partly understood, and that all those yellow-clad damsels were thralls to the folk of the burg, and belike were of the kindred of those captives, late taken, whom he had seen amidst the host at its entering into the burg. So he wandered away thence, thinking on what he should do till the sun was set. He had come into the open space underneath the walls, and had gone along till it came to the east gate. There he looked round him a little, and found people flowing back from the great place, whereto they had gathered to see the host mustered and the spoil blessed. Then he went on still under the wall, and noted not that here and there was a man turned about to look upon him curiously, for he was deep in thought concerning the things which he had seen and heard of, and pondered much what might have befallen his brethren since they sundered at the wantway nigh to the house of Upmeads. Withal the chief thing that he desired was to get away from the burg, for he felt himself unfree therein. And he said to himself that if he were forced to dwell among this folk, that he had better never have stolen himself away from his father and mother. And whiles even he thought that he would do his best on his morrow to get him back home to Upmeads again. But then, when he thought of how his life would go in his old home, there seemed to him a lack. And when he questioned himself as to what that lack was, straightway he seemed to see that Lady of the Wildwood standing before the men-at-arms in her scanty raiment the minute before his life was at adventure because of them. And in sooth he smiled to himself, then with a beating heart, as he told himself that above all things he desired to see that lady, whatever she might be, and that he would follow his adventure to the end until he met her. Amidst these thoughts he came unto the north gate, whereby he had first entered the burg, and by then it was as dark as the summer night would be. So he woke from his dream, as it were, and took his way briskly back to the Flower de Luce. Chapter 14. What Ralph heard of the matters of the Burg of the Four Friths. There was no candle in the hall when he entered, but it was not so dark therein but he might see Roger sitting on a stool near the chimney. And opposite to him on the settle sat two men, one very tall and big, the other small. Roger was looking away from these and whistling, and it came into Ralph's mind that he would have him think that he had naught to do with them, whether that were so or not. But he turned round as Ralph came up the hall, and rose and came up to him, and fell to talking with him and asking him how he liked the burg. And ever he spake fast and loud, so that it again came on Ralph that he was playing a part. Ralph heeded him little, but ever looked through the hall dusk on those twain, who presently arose and went toward the hall door. But when they were but halfway across the floor, a chamberlain came in suddenly, bearing candles in his hands. And the light fell on those guests and flashed back from a salade on the head of the big man. Ralph saw that he was clad in a long white gabardine, and he deemed that he was the very man whom he had last seen in the great place at Hymen, nigh the church, and before that upon the road. As for the smaller man, Ralph had no knowledge of him, for he could see but little of his face, whereas he was wrapped in a cloak. For as warm as the evening was, and wore a slouch hat withal, but his eyes seemed great and wondrous bright. But when they were gone, Ralph asked Roger if he knew aught of them, or if they had told him aught. "Nay," said Roger, "they came in here as I sat alone and had their meat, and spake not to me, and little to each other. I deem them not to be of the Burg. Nay, sooth to say, I doubt if they be true men." As he spake came in a sort of the townsmen, somewhat merry and noisy, and called for meat and drink and more lights, so that the board was brought, and the hall was speedily astir. These men, while supper was being dight, fell to talking to Ralph and Roger, and asking them questions of whence and whither, but nowise uncourteously. To whom Roger answered with the tale which he had told Ralph, and Ralph told what he would, and that was but little. But when the board was dight, they bade them sit down with them to eat. Ralph sat down at once, and Roger would have served him, but Ralph bade him to do it not, and constrained him to sit by his side. And the two sat a little apart from the townsmen. So when they had eaten their fill, and the wine was brought, and men were drinking kindly, Ralph began to ask Roger concerning those women whom he had seen in the street, and the captives whom he had seen brought in by the host, and if they were of one kindred, and generally how it was with them. And he spake somewhat softly, as if he would not break into the talk of the townsmen. But Roger answered him in a loud voice, so that all could hear. "Yea, lord, I will tell thee the tale of them, which setteth forth well but the wise policy and the great mercy of the folk of the Burg and their rulers." Said Ralph, "Are these women also of the Dry Tree? For I perceive them to be born of the foes of the Burg." Now the townsmen had let their talk drop a little to listen to the talk of the aliens, and Roger answered still in a loud voice, Nay, it is not so. These queens are indeed war-taken thralls, but not from them of the Dry Tree, or they would have been slain at once, like as the carles of those accursed ones. But these are the folk of the wheat-wearers, even as those whom thou sawest brought today amidst the other spoil. And to this folk the Burg showeth mercy, and whenso the host goeth against them and overcometh, and that is well nigh whenever they meet, these worthy lords slay no woman of them, but the men only, whether they be old or youngest. As for their women, they are brought hither and sold at the market cross to the highest bidder. And this honour they have, that such of them as be fair, and that is the more part of the younger ones, fetch no ill penny. Yet for my part I were loath to cheapen such wares, for they make but evil servants, being proud and not abiding stripes lightly, or toiling the harder for them, and they be somewhat too handy with the knife, if they deem themselves put upon. Speak, I sooth, my masters, quoth he, turning toward them of the town. Said a burgher, somewhat stricken in years, Naught but sooth. Peaceable men like to me eschew such servants, all the more because of this, that if one of these queens misbehave with a knife, or strayeth from her master's bed, the laws of the Burg meddle not therein. For the wise men say that such folk are no more within the law than the kine be, and may not be for their deeds be brought before let or assize any more than kine. So that if the master punish her not for her misdoings, unpunished she needs must go, yea, even if her deed be mere murder. That is sooth, said a somewhat younger man, yet whiles it fareth ill with them at the hands of our women. To wit, my father's brother has even now come from the war to find his thrall all spoiled by his wife. And what remedy may he have against his wife? His money is gone, even as if he had howled his horse or his best cow. Yea, said a third, we were better without such cattle. A thrust with a sword and all the tale told were the better way of dealing with them. Said another, Yet are the queens good websters, and lacking them, figured cloth of silk would be far fetched and dear bought here. A young man gaily clad, who had been eyeing the speakers disdainfully, spake next, and said, Fair sirs, ye are speaking like hypocrites, and as if your lawful wives were here to hearken to you, whereas ye know how goodly these thralls be, and that many of them can be kind enough withal. And ye would think yourselves but ill bestead if ye might not cheapen such jewels for your money. Which of you will go to the cross next Saturday, and there buy him a fairer wife than he can wed out of our lineages? And a wife with all of whose humours he need take no more account of than the dullness of his hound or the skittish temper of his mare, so long as the thong smarts and the twigs sting. One more or two grinned as he spake, but some bent their brows at him, yet scarce in earnest, and the talk thereof dropped. Nor did Ralph ask any more questions, for he was somewhat downhearted, calling to mind the frank and free maidens of Upmead, and their friendly words and hearty kisses. And him seemed the world was worse than he had looked to find it. Howsoever, the oldest and soberest of the guests, seeing that he was a stranger and of noble aspect, came unto him and sat by him, and he fell to telling Ralph tales of the wars of the men of the burg with the wheat-wearers, and how in time past, when the town was but little fenced, the wheat-wearers had stormed their gates and taken the city, and had made a great slaughter. But they had yet spared many of the fighting men, although they had abided there as the masters of them, and held them enthralled for 3 generations of men. After which time the sons of the old burg-dwellers, having grown very many again, and divers of them being trusted in sundry matters by the conquerors, who oppressed them but little, rose up against them, as occasion served, in the winter season and the Yule feast, and slew their masters, save for a few who were hidden away. And hereafter, quoth he, did we make the burg strong and hard to win, as ye see it today. And we took for our captain the forest lord, who erewhile had dwelt in the clearings of the wildwood. And he wedded the fair lady, who was the son's daughter of him who had been our lord ere the wheat-wearers overcame us. And we grew safe and free and mighty again. And the son of the forest lord, whom he had called the war-smith, he it was who beheld the burg, too much given to pleasure, and delighting in the softness of life. And he took order to harden our hearts, and to cause all freemen to learn the craft of war and battle, and let the women and thralls and aliens see to other craftsmanship and to chaffer. And even so it was done as he would. And ye shall find us hearty of heart enough, though belike not so joyous as might be, yet at least we shall not be easy to overcome. So indeed it seemeth, said Ralph. Yet will I ask of you first one question and then another. Ask on, said the burgher. Said Ralph, how is it that ye, being so strong, should still suffer of them the dry tree, taking a man here and a man there, when ye might destroy them utterly? The burg reddened and cleared his throat, and said, Sir, it must be made clear to you that these evil beasts are no peril to the burg of the Four Friths. All the harm they may do us is as when a cur-dog biteth a man in the calf of the leg, whereby the man shall be grieved indeed, but the dog slain. Such grief as that they have done us at whiles, but the grief is paid for thus, that the hunting and slaying of them keeps our men in good trim, and pleasures them. Shortly to say it, they are the chief deer wherewith our wood is stocked. He stopped a while, and then went on again, and said, To say sooth, they be not very handy for crushing as a man crushes a wasp, because sorcery goes with them, and the wiles of one who is their queen, the evilest woman who ever spat upon the blessed host of the altar. Yet is she strong, a devouring sea of souls, God help us. And he blessed himself therewith. Said Ralph, Yet a word on these wheat-wearers. It seemeth that ye never fail to overcome them in battle. But seldom at least, quoth the burgher. Said Ralph, Then it were no great matter for you to gather a host overwhelming, and to take their towns and castles, and forbid them weapons, and make them your thralls to till the land for you, to which now they call theirs, so that ye might have of their gettings all save that were needful for them to live as thralls. I deem it were an easy thing, said the burgher. Quoth Ralph, Then why do ye not so? It were but a poor game to play, said the burgher. Such of their wealth as we have a mind to, we can have now at the cost of a battle or two, begun one hour and ended the next. Were we their masters, sitting down amidst of their hatred, and amidst of their plotting, yea, and in the very place where that were the hottest and thickest, the battle would be to begin at every sun's uprising, nor would it be ended at any sunset. Ha, what sayest thou? Said Ralph. This seemeth to me but the bare truth. Yet it is little after the manner of such masterful men as ye be. But why then do ye slay all their carles that are taken, whereas ye bear away the women and make thralls of them at home, that is to say, foes in every house? It may be, said the burgher, that this is not amongst the wisest of our dealings. Yet we may do no otherwise, for thus we swore to do by all the greatest oaths that we might swear, in the days when we first cast off their yoke, and yet were not overstrong at first. And now it hath so grown into a part of our manners, yea, and of our very hearts and minds, that the slaying of a wheat-wearer is to us a lighter matter than the smiting of a rabbit or a fowl-mart. But now look ye, fair sir, my company ariseth from table, so I bid thee a good night, and I give thee a good rede along with a good wish, to wit, that thou ask not too many questions in this city concerning its foemen. For here is the stranger looked upon with doubt, if he neither will take the wages of the burg for battle, nor hath aught to sell. Ralph reddened at his word, and the other looked at him steadily as he spoke, so that Ralph deemed that he had mistrusted him. He deemed, moreover, that 3 or 4 of the others looked hard at him as they went towards the door, while Roger stood somewhat smiling and humming a snatch of an old song. But when the other guests had left the hostelry, Roger left his singing, and turned to Ralph and said, Master, meseems that they mistrust us, and now maybe is that peril that I spake of nigher than I deemed when we came into the burgs this morning. And now I would that we were well out of the burg, and in the merry greenwood again, and it repents me that I brought thee hither. Nay, good fellow, quoth Ralph, heed it not. Besides, it was me, not thee, that they seemed to doubt of. I will depart hence tomorrow morning no worser than I came, and leave thee to seek thy fortune here, and good luck go with thee. Roger looked hard at him and said, Not so, young lord. If thou goest, I will go with thee, for thou hast won my heart, I know not how. And I would verily be thy servant, to follow thee whithersoever thou goest, for I think that great deeds will come of thee. This word pleased Ralph, for he was young and lightly put faith in men's words, and he loved to be well thought of, and was fain of good fellowship withal. So he said, This is a good word of thine, and I thank thee for it. And look to it that in adventures and in the reward of them thou shalt have thy due share. Lo, here my hand on it. Roger took his hand, yet therewith his face seemed a little troubled, but he said naught. Then spoke Ralph, True it is that I am not fain to take the wages of the burg, for it seems to me that they be hard men, and cruel and joyless, and that their service shall be rather churlish than knightly. Howbeit, let I bring counsel, and we will see to this tomorrow, for now I am both sleepy and weary. Therewith he called the chamberlain, who bore a wax light before him to his chamber. And he did off his raiment, and cast himself on his bed, and fell asleep straightway, before he knew where Roger was sleeping, whether it were in the hall or some place else. Chapter 15. How Ralph departed from the Burg of the Four Friths. Him seemed he had scarce been asleep a minute, ere woke with the sound of someone saying softly, Master, Master, awake. So he sat up and answered softly in his turn, Who is it? What is amiss, since the night is yet young? I am thy fellow farer, Roger, said the speaker, and this thou hast to do, get on thy raiment speedily, and take thy weapons without noise, if thou wouldest not be in the prison of the burg before sunrise. Ralph did as he was bidden without more words, for already when he lay down, his heart misgave him that he was in no safe place. He looked to his weapons and armor, that they should not clash, and down they came into the hall and found the door on the latch. So out they went, and Ralph saw that it was somewhat cloudy. The moon was set, and it was dark, but Ralph knew by the scent that came in on the light wind, that a little stir of blended sounds, that it was hard on dawning. And even therewith he heard the challenge of the warders on the walls and their cryings of the hour, and the chimes of the belfry rang clear and loud, and seeming close above him, 2 hours and a half after midnight. Roger spake not, and Ralph was man-at-arms enough to know that he must hold his peace. And though he longed sore to have his horse Falcon with him, yet he wotted that it availed not to ask of his horse, since he durst not ask of his life. So they went on silently till they were out of the great place, and came into a narrow street, and so into another which led them straight into the houseless space under the wall. Roger led on as if he knew the way well, and in a twinkling were they come to a postern in the wall betwixt the east gate and the south. By the said postern Ralph saw certain men standing, and on the earth near by, whereas he was keen-eyed, he saw more than one man lying moveless. Spake Roger softly to the men who stood on their feet, "Is the rope twined?" "Nay, rope twiner," said one of them. Then Roger turned and whispered to Ralph, "Friends, get out thy sword." Wherewithal the gate was opened, and they all passed out through the wall, and stood above the ditch in the angle nook of a square tower. Then Ralph saw some of the men stoop and shoot out a broad plank over the ditch, which was deep, but not wide thereabout, and straightway he followed the others over it, going last save Roger. By then they were on the other side. He saw a glimmer of the dawn in the eastern heaven, but it was still more than dusk, and no man spoke again. They went on softly across the plain fields outside the wall, creeping from bush to bush, and from tree to tree. For here, if nowhere about the circuit of the burg, were a few trees growing. Thus they came into a little wood and passed through it, and then Ralph could see that the men were 6 besides Roger. By the glimmer of the growing dawn he saw before them a space of meadows, with high hedges about them, and a dim line that he took for the roof of a barn or a grange, and beyond that a dark mass of trees. Still they pressed on without speaking. A dog barked not far off, and the cocks were crowing, and close by them in the meadow a cow lowed and went hustling over the bents and the long unbenten buttercups. Day grew apace, and by then they were under the barn gable, which he had seen aloof. He saw the other roofs of the grange, and heard the bleating of sheep. And now he saw those 6 men clearly, and noted that one of them was very big and tall, and one small and slender. And it came into his mind that these 2 were none other than the twain whom he had come upon the last night sitting in the hall of the Flower de Luce. Even therewith came a man to the gate of the sheepcote by the grange, and caught sight of them, and had the wits to run back at once, shouting, "Hugh, Wat, Richard, and all ye, out with you, out of doors. Here be men. Where the Dry Tree? Bows and bills, bows and bills." With that, those fellows of Ralph made no more ado, but set off running at their best towards the wood aforesaid, which crowned the slope leading up to the grange. And now they took no care to go softly, nor heeded the clashing of their armor. Ralph ran with the best, and entered the wood alongside the slim youth aforesaid, who stayed not at the wood's edge, but went on running still. But Ralph stayed, and turned to see what was toward, and beheld how the tall man was the last of their company. And ere he entered the wood, he turned about with a bent bow in his hand, and even as he knocked the shaft, the men from the grange, who were 7 in all, came running out from behind the barn gable, crying out, "Ho, thieves! Ho, ye of the Dry Tree! Abide till we come! Flee not from handy strokes!" The tall man had the shaft to his ear in a twinkling, and loosed straightway, then knocked and loosed another shaft without staying to note how the first had sped. But Ralph saw that a man was before each of the shafts had fallen to earth, though he had no time to see aught else. For even therewith the tall man caught him by the hand, and crying out, "The 3rd time!" ran on with him and after the rest of their company. And whereas he was long-legged and Ralph light-footed, they speedily came upon them who were running still, but laughing as they ran, and jeering at the men of the burg. And the tall man shouted out to them, "Yea, lads, the counterfeit Dry Tree that they have raised in the burg shall be dry enough this time." "Truly," said another, "till we come to water it with the blood of these wretches." "Well, well, get on," said a third. "Waste not your wind in talk. Those carles will make but a short run of it to the walls, long as it was for us, creeping and creeping as we behoved to." The long man laughed. "Thou sayest sooth," said he, "but thou art the longest-winded of all in talking. Get on, lads." They laughed again at his word, and sped on with less noise, while Ralph thought within himself that he was come into strange company. For now he knew well that the big man was even he whom he had first met at the churchyard gate of the thorp under Bear Hill, yet he deemed that there was naught for it now but to go on. Within a while they all slacked somewhat, and presently did but walk though swiftly through the paths of the thicket. These Ralph deemed full surely was part of that side of the Wood Perilous that lay south of the Burg of the Four Friths. And now Roger joined himself to him, and spake to him aloud, and said, So, fair master, thou art out of the peril of death for this bout. Art thou also sure of that? Quoth Ralph. Or who are these that be with us? Meseems they smell of the Dry Tree. Yea, or rebels and runaways therefrom, said Roger with a dry grin. But whosoever they may be, thou shalt see that they will suffer us to depart whither we will. If we like not their company, I will be thy warrant thereof. Moreover, said Ralph, I have lost Falcon my horse. It is a sore miss of him. May be, quoth Roger, but at least thou hast saved thy skin. And whereas there are many horses on the earth, there is but one skin of thine. Be content if thou wilt, thou shalt win somewhat in exchange for thine horse. Ralph smiled, but somewhat sourly, and even therewith he heard a shrill whistle, a little aloof, and the men stayed and held their peace, for they were talking together freely again now. Then the big man put his fingers to his mouth, and whistled again in answer. A third whistle answered him, and lo, presently, as their company hastened on, the voices of men, and anons they came into a little wood-lawn, wherein standing about or lying on the grass beside their horse were more than a score of men well armed, but without any banner or token, and all in white armour with white gabardines thereover. And they had with them, as Ralph judged, some dozen of horses, more than they needed for their own riding. Great was the joy at this meeting, and there was embracing and kissing of friends, but Ralph noted that no man embraced that slender youth, and that he held him somewhat aloof from the others, and all seemed to do him reverence. Now spake one of the runaways. Well, lads, here be all we four well met again along with those twain who had came to help us at our pinch, as their wont is. And Roger withal, good at need again, and a friend of his, as it seemeth, and whom we knoweth not. See ye to that. Then stood forth the big man, and said, He is a fair young knight, as ye may see. He rideth seeking adventures, and Roger did us to wit that he was abiding in the burg at his peril, and would have him away, even if it were somewhat against his will. And we were willing that it should be so, all the more as I have a guess concerning what he is, and a foreseeing man that might think that luck should go with him. Therewith he turned to Ralph and said, How say ye, fair sir, will ye take guesting with us a while and learn our ways? Said Ralph, Certain I am that whither ye will have me go, thither must I. Yet I deem that I have an errand that lies not your way. Therefore, if I go with you, ye must so look upon it that I am in your friendship as one compelled. To be short with you, I crave leave to depart and go my own road. As he spoke, he saw the youth walking up and down in short turns, but his face he could scarce see at all. What for his slouched hat, what for his cloak. And at last he saw him go up to the tall man and speak softly to him a while. The tall man nodded his head, and as the youth drew right back nigh to the thicket, spake to Ralph again. Fair sir, we grant thine asking, and add to this thereto, that we give thee the man who has joined himself to thee, Roger of the Rope Walk to wit, to help thee on the road, so that thou mayest not turn thy face back to the Burg of the Four Friths, where thine errand and thy life withal were soon sped now, or run into any other trap which the Wood Perilous may have for thee. And yet if thou think better of it, thou mayest come with us straightway, for we have naught to do tarry here any longer. And in any case, here is a good horse that we will give thee, since thou hast lost thy steed. And Roger, who rideth with thee, he also is well horsed. Ralph looked hard at the big man, who now had his salade thrown back from his face, to see if he gave any token of jeering or malice, but could see not such. Nay, his face was grave and serious, not ill-fashioned, though it were both long and broad like his body, his cheekbones somewhat high, his eyes grey and middling great, and looking, as it were, far away. Now deems Ralph that as for a trap of the Wood Perilous, He had already fallen into the trap, for he scarce needed to be told that these were men of the Dry Tree. He knew also that it was Roger who had led him into this trap, although he deemed it done with no malice against him. So he said to himself that if he went with Roger, he but went a roundabout road to the Dry Tree, so that he was well nigh choosing to go on with their company. Yet again he thought that something might well befall which would free him from that fellowship if he went with Roger alone, whereas if he went with the others, it was not that he might be, but that he was already of the fellowship of the Dry Tree, and most would like to go straight thence to their stronghold. So he spake as soberly as the tall men had done. Since ye give me the choice, fair sir, I will depart hence with Roger alone, whom ye call my man, though to me he seemeth to be yours. Howbeit he has led me to you once, and belike will do so once more. Yea, quoth the big man, smiling no whit more than erst, and that will make the 4th time. Depart then, fair sir, and take this word with thee, that I wish thee good, and not evil. This is the end of chapters 12 through 15 of The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. Thank you for listening.